is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I am wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and today, because I've also been experimenting with some new makeup, you also get a fancy face. I am still definitely playing catch up and doing some of my beginning of the year videos, and I always have a big old book haul right near the beginning of the year because of Christmas and my birthday, which happens shortly thereafter in the beginning of January. So this is my December and January book haul that includes mostly things that I got as gifts for those two occasions, but also a few books that I bought myself as well. So starting with the books that I got as Christmas gifts, I'm gonna start with the big doozy here that is 4 volumes. This here, is the 4 volumes of the Chicago University Press edition of The Journey to the West. This is the edition that is translated and edited by Anthony C. Yu, and this is the revised edition of that translation. This is a classic, I believe, 16th century Chinese text, and I see this referenced in enough different media that I consume that I sort of felt that this was a classic I should familiarize myself with. This is the one with the Monkey King in it. And most, I'm gonna set this down because this is huge, most English language translations of Journey to the West are abridged, so you'll get one short volume. And most of those are entitled Monkey Journey to the West. And I sort of bristle at the idea that I would read an abridged version of something. And this 4-volume translation from a university press seemed to be the best unabridged translation available. And because it was 4 volumes at university press prices, I asked for it for Christmas instead of buying it for myself. So my dad gave me these for Christmas. I'm going to show you that the spines make a picture, and then I'm going to show you each of the volumes. This is volume 1. This is volume 2. This is volume 3. This is volume 4. So I don't know when I'll try to read this. It will obviously be a long-term reading project if I want to get through the whole thing. I also might read, the first volume or 2 and then bail and read an abridged version for the ending. We'll see how this goes. So Journey to the West came from my dad for Christmas, and then I have another family member who always gives me books. So I provided this very eclectic wish list and expected to maybe get a few things off of it. And my beloved family member gave me all of them plus a few extras. So this is fairly overwhelming. I'm gonna start with the books from Christmas. The first 2 are the ones that are relatively recently published, in the last few years, recent fantasy novels. The first is The Once and Future Witches by Alix E. Harrow. I have read both the 10,000 Doors of January, and now I just recently read A Spindle Splintered, but I didn't have a copy of this one yet, and it is now out in paperback. This is a standalone historical fantasy. I assume there will be witches. And then the other one is Jade City by Fonda, which is a book that I did not think I had any interest in when it was released, and I was seeing some of the earliest reviews for it. It just didn't seem like my thing. But now this trilogy is complete and more people in my social media sphere are raving about this series. It seems like every day. So I figured this might be one that's worth stepping a little outside of my expected comfort zone to read. This is supposedly very action-packed and has a lot of family drama. The next 4 are all small press or indie published titles that I have had my eyes on for a while. The first is Stargazy Pie by Victoria Goddard. This is the first in the Greenwing and Dart series, which is a Fantasy of Manners series that I have been curious about for quite a while. This is either self-published or from a very small press, I'm not sure which. I've seen some buzz lately for some of Goddard's other novels, specifically The Hands of the Emperor, and I think there are a couple of others that are in that same, like, connected companion series or something. But this series has actually been on my radar for much longer because Fantasy of Manners. I now have actually quite a lot of books on my TBR that I own that are Fantasy of Manners novels that I wish I had read but have not yet read, and someday I should just sit down and like read a bunch of them all at once. It would make me very happy, I think. The next is a novella that was actually on one of my anticipated releases lists from last year, and this is The Necessity of Stars by E. Catherine Tolber, which is a science fiction novella published by Neon Hemlock Press. I believe this has some climate fiction and first contact elements to it, and it's supposedly very beautifully written. And then the next book, which I think might also be a novella in terms of length, but I'm not sure, is Lagoonfire by Francesca Forrest. This is a sequel to The Inconvenient God, which I have read and I have talked about in a wrap-up, and that book is very short. It's a novelette, and I think this one is novella length. These are fantasy stories with a protagonist whose job is to decommission old gods. And then the next is Swordheart by T. Kingfisher. This is, I think, the first of the romance novels, the very strange romance novels that she has written in this same fantasy world that I think the Clock Tower War duology and some other things are also set in. I have not yet read anything set in this world, although I own a couple of them. I think this one is a standalone and that it can serve as an entry point into this fantasy world. I have basically accepted that I will never keep up with Ursula Vernon's T. Kingfisher output. She's just so prolific. But I can try. I can at least prioritize the ones that I think I'm interested in, and I do really want to read this one. And then the stack of books that this lovely relative gave me for my birthday is all of the used books. The other two books that I had asked for are books that I have been scouring used bookstores for years, and I know I could order them online, but I never do order used books online. And I just haven't come across them, but they're books that are very high priority reads for me. The first is Summers at Castle Auburn by Sharon Shinn. Sharon Shinn is one of those fantasy authors that I think I will love, and I have thought I will love for years, but I've just somehow never read. And this one is a standalone, and it's possibly one of her most well-known books. Anyways, because it's a standalone, that's the reason I've picked this one as the first Sharon Shinn book I want to read. I believe this is fantasy. I don't know if it's historical fantasy or not. I can't quite tell. But this was published in 2001, and I just sort of think it's one of those books that will probably be like a comforting, warm hug for me. And then the other used book that I asked for is The Warrior's Apprentice by Lois McMaster Bujold, which is the next book I need to read in the Vorkosigan saga after having read Cordelia's Honor, which is a bind-up of Shards of Honor and Barayar. I have a problem where I cannot seem to commit to reading a series by Bujold. I read Curse of Chalian and then didn't continue in the World of the Five Gods. I read Cordelia's Honor and then haven't continued with Vorkosigan because I didn't have this one. I have an odd, eclectic assortment of Vorkosigan saga novels that I picked up at a used bookstore, but there are lots of holes in like the reading order that I need to fill in to be able to actually read them all. And then I read The Spirit Ring, which is a standalone. I have failed utterly in like picking up any sequels by Bujold. So hopefully that will change, hopefully. And then I also got a whole bunch of other older used science fiction books that I did not ask for at all, so these were all a total surprise. The first two are classics that I honestly have some trepidation about because they're not classics that are like high on my to-read list. The first is The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert A. Heinlein, and then the second is Dune by Frank Herbert. I did try to read Dune in 8th grade and gave up about halfway through, so that was an 8th grade DNF. And then the only other thing I've read by Heinlein is Starship Troopers, which I strongly disliked, so also nervous about this. I am aware that we are having Twitter discourse about the SFF canon again, and I don't want to get into it, but I do also feel like these are the sorts of books that I've seen so much discourse about that I almost don't feel like I need to read them. I feel like I've seen all the takes already, but if I ever need to have these as a point of reference in my life, I now have copies that I can pick up. And then the other two are books that I have never heard of. The first is Enemy Mine by Barry B. Longyear. I cannot tell from the cover copy what this is about other than that it is a Nebula and Hugo Award winner. It's from 1979 and it's a novella, and that's the only thing I know about it. And then the other one is somewhat more recent, but again, a science fiction novel that I have never heard of. This is Paradise Past by Jerry Oltion. This is published by a small press. It's from 2004, and it seems to be about how the inhabitants of a generation ship become divided when they discover 2 inhabitable planets instead of 1. And this actually might be a new copy. The others in this batch were all used, but this is in very good condition. Okay, and then the last 3 books in this book haul are the books I bought myself. So you may remember, I think it was like end of December after Christmas. I don't totally remember when it was, but it was when Barnes & Noble had like a 50% off hardcovers in store sale. I was real mad about that because it was the height of the Omicron surge, and I'm in New York City and it was bad here. And I was trying not to get COVID so I could keep some other plans I had, so I was not going to a store. But they also had a selection of hardcover books online that were 50% off, and obviously that wasn't all the hardcovers in the store. It was a limited selection, but there were a couple books there that I was in fact interested in, so I bought them. These are both historical fantasy novels. The first is A Marvellous Light by Freya Marske. This is the first in, I believe, a historical queer fantasy romance series set in alternate Edwardian England with magic. I'm not sure if this is going to be just 2 books or more than that, but I know the second book has been announced. And then the second one is Sistersong by Lucy Holland. This was one that was not on my radar at all until after it had been released, but it absolutely should have been. This is a retelling of the folktale slash murder ballad that goes by a bunch of different names and has a bunch of different variants. But it's the one where the jealous sister drowns the other, and then someone makes a harp out of her bones that sings and tells the story. This is a debut novel, and I am hoping it is a standalone, because standalones are good for the soul. And then my last book of this haul is a pre-order, and it is unintentionally poetically fitting to have started and ended this haul video with Chinese translated fiction, the first being classic and the second being incredibly modern. This is the first volume of Heaven Official's Blessing by Moxiang Tongshu, which is an online pen name. This is a Chinese web novel that is being published sequentially in English by Seven Seas, which is like a manga and light novel publisher usually. And this is going to be 8 volumes long in English publication. This author writes, loosely speaking, historical fantasy with gay romance. She has 3 web novels that are all getting published by Seven Seas. This one, plus The Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation, which is the novel that the C-drama The Untamed is based on, if you've seen that. And then The Scum Villain's Self-Saving System. I have sort of already read this, but in a format where I chose not to cover it on my booktube channel for several reasons. I read an unofficial fan translation. I'm gonna set this down while I talk about why I decided that I will not talk about fan translations on my booktube channel. Firstly, I think it would be wildly unfair to fan translators who are doing a labor of love in their free time to critically discuss their work in the same way that I would talk about professionally translated fiction. Secondly, I'm super aware of the fact that I'm lacking not only a lot of Chinese cultural context for this sort of fiction, but also a lot of genre context for the genres that are popular in Chinese web novels. So again, much more comfortable having public opinions about a thing once it's commercially packaged for Anglophone consumption, which the fan translations are not. There's certainly a lot of enthusiasm for trying to explain things, I think, in the fan translation community, but not a lot of, like, you know, professional editorial oversight. And these volumes have like significant amounts of supplementary materials in the back. There's a name guide, there's a pronunciation guide, there's a glossary. There is hopefully more of that sort of stuff that will help present something to a readership that isn't super familiar with the cultural background or the literary context. And then the third reason I have for not talking about fan translated work on this channel is that what I read was a free online translation of content that is paid web content in its original language. So reading fan translations is borderline piracy, and I decided for myself that so long as there weren't commercially available English translations, I was fine reading a fan translation that was free online for myself, but I wasn't going to promote that content in any way on social media. Which leads neatly into the reason that I'm now buying these as they're released, because I do want to support the official English language publication. For Heaven Official's Blessing, Seven Seas actually hired the fan translator who did the fan translation that I read, but this has been significantly edited and polished for publication. I did dabble in reading some amount of all three of these novels by this author in fan translation, and this is the only one of the three that I actually got hooked enough on to read in its entirety, so this is the one of the three that I am buying. I might end up librarying Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation at some point. I think I bounced off of the writing of the fan translation of that one, combined with the fact that I sometimes find it hard to focus on reading long books if I have already seen an adaptation. But despite the fact that I'm buying these as they release, I am not necessarily planning a reread anytime soon. I will probably wait to do that reread until after all 8 volumes are published sometime in 2023, I believe. So you will see these popping up in book hauls from now until then, but I probably won't read or review any of these volumes in the meantime. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit what this is about. This is loosely historical fantasy in that the setting is like geographically ancient China, but it's not set during an actual identifiable historical period. The protagonist, Heinlien, is a very unlucky god who has been kicked out of the heavens in disgrace twice. At the beginning of this, he ascends to godhood for a 3rd time. His love interest, Hua Chang, is a powerful ghost king who is the terror of the heavens and cares immensely about Heinlien for reasons. There is 800 years of backstory. There are a lot of like subplot arcs, story arcs, some of which I care about more than others. There are 2 main supernatural mystery arcs in this first volume, neither of which I particularly care all that much about. However, there is some very high quality fluff that happens in between them. There is a Donghua animated adaptation that has 1 season so far that is on Netflix. And I think this volume ends at the same place that season 1 of the animated adaptation ends. I don't know if that was intentional or a lucky coincidence. These English volumes don't match up with the books of the original Chinese web novel. But I hesitate to tell you, you should check out the adaptation on Netflix, because it's one of those adaptations that is almost too faithful to the source material, like for the sake of the fans. I think it would be confusing to someone who is new to the story, if that makes any sense. Like, things that aren't explained in dialogue, for example, just sort of go unexplained, and there's so much world building in here, and I think a lot of that gets sort of lost or is very hard to pick up on. But if you are casually curious, the animated adaptation could be a place to dip your toes in. And Netflix has better subtitles for it than the original Billy subtitles. Just saying. That was a pleasant surprise. So there you have it. That is my December and January book haul. That was a lot of talking. For a lot of books. Anyways, let me know if you've read any of these books or if you're interested in them. Let me know what you think. Anyhow, I hope you're all having a very nice day. That is all. Bye for now.